Welcome to SciTech Culture with Steve Kern and Ben Warner, where we examine science, technology, and culture in the 21st century. Visit our website at scitechculture.com.
So it's actually been a while since I've watched Bill Maher's show real time, largely because not that I've always agreed with him or anything like that over time, but I'm finding that his trajectory into where he's going now, some of it's still good, some of it isn't, and I kind of question, it's like anything. I guess people change over time and they evolve their views, and the pandemic's obviously impacted everything. But I did particularly enjoy his most recent editorial he did at the end of the show, which was essentially let the population collapse, which was essentially a reference to the fact that we have too many people on Earth. We're all consuming resources. It's all finite. It plays into that whole argument about how do we handle the environment, climate change, all that sort of stuff when we're growing more and more people. And yes, there may technically be plenty of space for a lot more people, but it's a question around resourcing. And also that more and more people want to live like the typical American and have and as they say, you'd need 5 Earths to satisfy the needs of 8 billion people to live like that, and the tracking being that 8 billion is what we're going to reach by the end of the year. And I actually, when he said that in the editorial, I was kind of amused, because then I was like thinking to myself, oh yeah, we go back 20 years and we were making Guardian, the film, back in 2001, and I opened out a little byline at the top of the film that said over 6 billion people, blah, 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 to start the story. And I thought, wow, that 2 billion people in 20 years to get to, that's astonishing. Obviously, from 1950 or so to get to 8 billion now in only 70 years from about 2 billion is sort of mind-blowing, really. But it kind of points to I think the point that he was making is that is it such a bad thing that people are having less kids or whatever, and maybe we need to kind of tamper down on how many humans we're producing, and maybe have a bit more of a thought about our impact on the environment. Obviously not as an exclusive issue, but taken all in a context of how we need to be a lot more mindful about how we're treating the planet if we want to be able to continue to live here, kind of thing.
Yeah, well, I found the whole piece, quite thought-provoking. Whichever side of the fence you sit on, I think there's no question. If you really analyse the threat of climate change, it comes down to population and consumption, and within that, yeah, we could go to 10 billion people or 12 billion people on the planet, but you really have to understand, I think, what that means. If what the average, developed world individual wants requires 5 Earth resources, then, you start to realise that you've only got limited resources, and the current system that we are living within is beyond our means. So that would mean that somewhere along the line we're going to have a more equitable distribution. And when you think about that equitable distribution, I think we all have to remember in the developed world that we use 20 times more than some of the nations that are still very much emerging economies. 20 times for every person over there. So that means that we probably have to give up some, share it round, and that's the way we'll have less impact.
And that'll be easier said than done, because people, I would say, in the developed world, a lot of people won't be so comfortable to give up those things. Sure, there'll probably be people that will, but it's quite hard to try and sort of get to that point. I guess in context, using that as a context, there was also this other story about that the CSIRO did a report, a megatrends report, talking about what will be some defining moments over the coming decades. They broadly spoke about health, AI and autonomous systems, geopolitical shifts, digital and data economies, resource pressure and biodiversity, and diversity, equity, and transparency. So a couple of those dot points are some of the things we've already discussed. Some are technological as well. You'd expect there'd be advances in AI and automation, even though that's already something that's been in train for quite some time. But the more implementation of AI in a lot of systems is something that we've probably come to expect. And again, the running joke being it's not always Skynet potentially. There may just be something that doesn't have a consciousness and just does its job really well in trying to figure things out for us. So in that list, the geopolitical shifts is something that actually caught my attention. Just to focus on that a little bit, in that if you think about the last 30 years and how things have been relatively stable from a nation-state perspective. Yes, there's been threats, but they've been more individual actors as opposed to nation-states. And if you compare that to, say, the events of the 20th century, where there were, empires rose and fall, and countries went to war against each other, and it was bloody, and it was the world power dynamic shifted several times during the 20th century, and we haven't really seen that happen in the beginning of the 21st century yet. One could argue that the Ukraine-Russia conflict is a little bit of a return. It's not nice to say it this way, but it's a bit of a return to form in that way, of a reminder of how these things can actually just flare up at any time, and how the emerging, I guess, sort of China-US dynamic and how that's going to play out in the coming decades and how that's going to work. It'll be interesting to see what I guess happens during all of that, and it may be that. It may be a lot more unstable, might not be the right word, but we may be seeing a period where things don't play out the way we expect them to, especially compared to the last 30 years or so.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to ponder how the world will be in the future, especially from a geopolitical sort of point of view. But I think the last 30 years pre-COVID, we saw, peak globalization, expansion, flow of money, opportunity, were all probably exactly where all the proponents of a global economy had sort of suggested we'd be. With the shock of COVID, with the shutdown of borders, and now some geopolitical repositioning coming at the same time, that changes everything. And we've already seen this with supply chain dynamics. We've seen it with various tit-for-tat trade embargoes. And, obviously once you put a conflict in there as well, that redraws the battle lines as well. And of course, as always, somewhere within that, there's a fossil fuel or energy, conflict in there as well. So it's, for the global economy, this is really a huge shock. And it means there will be trading blocks or alliances or nations banding together, as we have seen in the past and many times in the past, and will undoubtedly occur into the future until humans sort of evolve into something a little bit higher and a little bit more clever and cooperative. Until then, I think we're heading through another period of uncertainty, and let's just hope that our leaders are adept enough and clever enough to avoid truly serious ramifications for the whole world.
Absolutely. And I guess just sort of to sort of wrap it up a little bit, is that if you look at, even though it says 7 megatrends, it seems to be, aside from the geopolitical matters that we were just talking about, then I think they actually broadly go into two types of trends, which are the further development of technology and its implementation to supposedly make life better, but also how do we improve our record on the environment? How do we improve our ability to take care of the world that we live in so that it's sustainable. That seems to be the two broad sort of messages coming from the report, because obviously our health feeds into that, resource pressure, biodiversity, all that sort of stuff, and the digital nature of our changing economy as it goes through time. Like, I can imagine that in, even 10, 20 years' time, things are going to look very different than what they do now, for instance.
Oh, look, I agree, and I think there's two ways you can respond to this. It's either a real horror show and doom and gloom, and we're all ruined, or it's actually it's a time of change. I think for a lot of the dialogue that we get, there's real concern around climate change. We're not doing enough, and we're not doing it rapidly enough, and the consequences could be calamitous, and there's no question about that. But by the same token, I don't think these things happen quickly. And from my understanding of what I see, a lot of the technologies that are the solutions weren't available 10 years ago, but they are emerging now. And these are big technologies that can have massive impact in terms of turning things around. Will it be quick enough? I don't know. What will be the effects of climate change, for instance, and what impacts will that have? I don't think anyone can accurately predict that. We're seeing some very real threats that are, going to change our world. There's no question about that. We don't know to what extent. By the same token, there are technologies, and when the real threats, and this is my assessment of human nature, when the real threats really start to impact, whether it's too late or not, we'll take action. And I think, me being the optimist, we'll take action successfully, and we'll get there in the end. But the world will be a very different place to wherever it is we get to deal with these global threats. And I don't know what the outcomes will be, and I don't think anyone can predict them.
Yeah, I guess just one parting final thought from my end is that I think there's also an element of random unpredictability of something else that we can't even imagine that will also throw a spanner in the works as well, and who knows what that'll be. But again, being an optimist like yourself, I think we'll hopefully have the capacity to be able to deal with it.
That's right. I think it's wrong to take the doom and gloom approach, even if you feel that things aren't happening rapidly enough, and you do watch the news too much and see heat waves in places around the world and glaciers melting somewhere else. So we have to be courageous, and we spoke about population. We just have to consume less. We have to share more, and if we can do those things, they're not technological. They're things that we can do as individuals. They're outlooks we can take into our daily lives. And if we do that and look after each other, maybe humanity will succeed.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. All right, Steve, I might wrap it up there. So don't forget to check out our website, scitechculture.com. You can get all of our links and content there. You can subscribe to our YouTube and Vimeo channels, RSS feeds, etc. And we hope you enjoy the website. All right, so that's it for this episode. We'll catch you next time.